Edmunds just released a new wave of data, and it hit the car industry like a lightning strike. This wasn't a minor adjustment or a quiet correction buried in a spreadsheet. This was a clear signal that the entire auto market is moving in a direction most buyers, dealers, and even manufacturers were not prepared for. The numbers exposed a reality that completely contradicts the optimistic messaging coming from automakers. And once you understand what this data actually shows, it becomes impossible to look at the car market the same way again. According to Edmunds' latest findings, the gap between vehicle prices and what consumers can realistically afford has reached a breaking point. Monthly payments are climbing to historic highs, loan terms are stretching longer than ever, and yet demand is no longer keeping up. Buyers are not rushing into showrooms the way they used to. Instead, they are delaying purchases, backing out of deals, and in many cases walking away entirely after seeing the final numbers on the contract. What makes this data so shocking is how clearly it reveals buyer behavior shifting in real time. Edmunds reports a sharp increase in shoppers abandoning new vehicles and turning to used cars, but even that escape route is starting to collapse. Used car prices remain elevated, interest rates are punishing, and trade-in values are no longer enough to offset the cost. Consumers are stuck, and Edmunds' data shows that frustration is spreading fast. Even more alarming is what the data says about negative equity. A growing number of buyers owe more on their current vehicles than those vehicles are worth, and Edmunds shows this problem accelerating, not slowing down. This means millions of drivers are effectively trapped in their current cars, unable to upgrade without taking on even more debt. That single data point alone explains why showroom traffic is thinning across the country. Edmunds also revealed that incentives and discounts, while increasing, are no longer having the impact automakers expected. Cash rebates and dealer markdowns look good in advertisements, but they barely move the needle when interest rates and insurance costs are this high. Buyers are doing the math, and the math is killing deals before they ever happen. The industry is discovering that price cuts alone cannot fix a broken affordability equation. Perhaps the most unsettling insight from Edmunds is how quickly consumer confidence is eroding. Shoppers no longer believe prices will come down later, but they also do not believe buying now makes sense. That hesitation is deadly for an industry built on volume and turnover. When buyers freeze, inventories rise, carrying costs explode, and pressure builds throughout the entire supply chain. This data also sends a warning to automakers who bet heavily on premium trims and high-margin models. Edmunds shows that interest in fully loaded vehicles is weakening, while demand for base models is quietly rising. Buyers want simplicity, reliability, and manageable payments, not luxury features that push prices beyond reason. This shift alone could force manufacturers to rethink product strategies they spent years building, and here's where things get even more serious. Edmunds' numbers suggest this is not a temporary slowdown or a seasonal dip. The patterns point to a structural change in how Americans approach car ownership. Leasing is losing appeal, financing is becoming riskier, and long-term ownership is no longer guaranteed. The industry is facing a consumer that is more cautious, more informed, and far less willing to play along with inflated pricing. Dealers are feeling this pressure first, and Edmunds' data confirms it. Vehicles are sitting longer on lots, floor plan costs are rising, and profit margins are shrinking fast. The days of instant markups and effortless sales are fading, replaced by negotiation battles and hesitant buyers who are ready to walk away at the slightest red flag. And this is exactly where the Edmunds data draws a line in the sand, because what it reveals next suggests the market hasn't even felt the full impact yet. Because beneath those headline numbers sits a deeper shift that Edmunds is quietly pointing to, and it's one the industry has been trying to ignore. The data shows that consumers are no longer comparing cars brand to brand. They are comparing cars to everything else competing for their money. Rent, groceries, insurance, and utilities are now part of the car buying decision, and vehicles are losing that battle more often than not. When a family has to choose between a reliable payment and a reliable car, the car is increasingly losing. Edmunds also highlights a surge in loan extensions and deferred purchases, a clear sign that buyers are stretching ownership far beyond what automakers planned for. Vehicles are staying on the road longer, maintenance is replacing replacement, and this trend is draining future demand. Every year a buyer delays is a year that sales volume quietly evaporates, and the data shows this delay is becoming the norm, not the exception. What really rattled analysts is how uneven the pain has become across segments. Full-size trucks and large SUVs, once considered untouchable predictable profit machines are showing cracks. Edmunds' numbers reveal longer days on lot and heavier discounting in exactly the vehicles that used to sell themselves. At the same time, smaller, cheaper models are gaining attention, even if supply remains limited. That imbalance is dangerous for an industry built around high-margin vehicles. The data also exposes how interest rates are doing more damage than price increases ever did. Edmunds shows buyers walking away from deals not because the sticker price shocked them, but because the final monthly payment did. A vehicle that looks affordable on paper becomes unbuyable once financing is applied. This is forcing dealers into uncomfortable territory, where even aggressive discounts cannot overcome financing reality. Another critical point Edmunds raises is the growing divide between what automakers think buyers want and what buyers are actually searching for online. Search data indicates rising interest in older models, certified used vehicles, and even keeping existing cars running longer. New tech, massive screens, and complex systems are losing their appeal when they add thousands to the price. Practicality is quietly replacing prestige. Edmunds also notes that first-time buyers are being pushed out of the market entirely. Younger consumers are delaying ownership, sharing vehicles, or skipping car purchases altogether. This is a long-term problem that doesn't show up immediately in sales charts, but devastates future demand. When an entire generation disconnects from car ownership, recovery becomes far more difficult. And while automakers publicly talk about stabilization and recovery, Edmunds' data tells a very different story behind the scenes. Inventory may be rising, but it's not rising evenly. Certain models are piling up while others remain scarce, creating pricing distortions and consumer confusion. This fragmentation makes the market feel unpredictable, and unpredictability kills buyer confidence. The most sobering takeaway from Edmunds is that the industry's old playbook is no longer working. Higher prices, longer loans, and premium-heavy lineups are colliding with economic reality. The data doesn't suggest a sudden crash, but it does point to a slow grind that wears down manufacturers, dealers, and buyers alike. And just when it seems like the market has reached its limit, Edmunds' latest figures hint at another pressure point forming that could push the entire system even closer to the edge. That pressure point is insurance, and Edmunds' data makes it clear this cost is no longer a footnote in the buying process. Insurance premiums are rising so fast that in some cases they rival the monthly car payment itself. Buyers are discovering this only after choosing a vehicle, and the shock is causing deals to collapse at the last moment. Edmunds shows a growing number of consumers recalculating total ownership costs and realizing the car is simply not sustainable. Edmunds also points to repair and maintenance costs quietly influencing decisions. New vehicles are more complex, packed with sensors, cameras, and electronics that drive up repair bills. Buyers are increasingly aware that even minor accidents or warranty-expired repairs can become financial disasters. This fear is pushing shoppers towards simpler vehicles or delaying purchases altogether, adding another layer of resistance to new car sales. What's especially revealing is how Edmunds tracks buyer sentiment over time. Confidence isn't just low, it's volatile. 1 week of bad economic news or a rate hike instantly shows up in shopping behavior. This means the market has no buffer anymore. There's no cushion of pent-up demand waiting to rush back in. Every external shock now has an immediate impact on sales momentum. The data also highlights a surprising shift in loyalty. Edmunds shows brand switching accelerating as buyers chase affordability rather than legacy names. Longtime brand loyalists are walking away when prices cross personal limits. This undermines decades of brand building and makes competition far more brutal, especially for automakers that rely on reputation rather than value. Edmunds further reveals that electric vehicle pricing is adding confusion rather than clarity. Incentives, tax credits, and fluctuating prices are making buyers hesitant. Instead of feeling like they're getting a deal, consumers feel like they might overpay today and regret it tomorrow. That uncertainty is freezing EV demand and spilling over into the broader market. Another critical signal in Edmunds' data is how dealers are adjusting behavior. Sales tactics are becoming more conservative, negotiations are longer, and approvals are tougher. Lenders are tightening standards, and buyers with weaker credit are being shut out. This credit squeeze doesn't make headlines, but it quietly removes millions of potential buyers from the market. Edmunds also notes that trade-ins are no longer the safety net they once were. Values are stabilizing stabilizing or falling, leaving buyers with less leverage at the negotiating table. This erodes confidence and makes upgrading feel risky. When buyers fear losing value overnight, hesitation becomes the default response. Taken together, these signals paint a picture of a market under sustained pressure from every direction. Prices, rates, insurance, repairs, and confidence are all pulling against each other. Edmunds' data doesn't scream collapse, but it does whisper something more dangerous: exhaustion. And as this exhaustion spreads, the data suggests one more shift is coming, one that could fundamentally change how the auto industry measures success in the months ahead. That shift centers on volume versus survival, and Edmunds' data suggests the industry is quietly moving away from growth and toward damage control. Automakers are no longer chasing record sales numbers, they are trying to protect margins while demand weakens. The problem is that this strategy only works for so long before inventory pressure forces hard decisions. Edmunds shows that the balance between production and demand is becoming increasingly fragile. The data also reveals that manufacturers are slowing rollouts, delaying refreshes, and quietly trimming future plans. This isn't being framed as retreat, but Edmunds' numbers show it clearly. When fewer new models enter the pipeline, consumer excitement fades, and showroom traffic drops even further. The industry risks entering a loop where caution creates stagnation. Another overlooked insight from Edmunds is how regional disparities are widening. Certain markets are seeing steep discounting while others remain stubbornly overpriced. This uneven landscape frustrates buyers who can easily compare prices online. When shoppers feel like they are being treated unfairly depending on location, trust erodes, and Edmunds' data shows trust is already thin. Edmunds also tracks how long buyers are spending in the research phase, and that time is growing rapidly. Consumers are second-guessing every decision, comparing scenarios, and waiting for the right moment that may never come. This extended hesitation is a warning sign because it signals paralysis rather than confidence. What's especially concerning is how this behavior feeds back into dealer operations. Longer sales cycles increase costs, reduce throughput, and strain staffing. Edmunds' data indicates dealers are cutting expenses quietly, from reduced advertising to smaller inventories on the lot. These moves signal preparation for leaner times, not a rebound. The data further suggests that the traditional sales calendar is breaking down, seasonal spikes are flattening, incentives are less predictable, and even major sales events are losing impact. When patterns disappear, planning becomes guesswork, and that uncertainty ripples through the entire supply chain. Edmunds also highlights a subtle psychological shift among buyers. Cars are no longer viewed as upgrades or rewards, but as obligations. This change in mindset is profound. When a product shifts from aspiration to burden, demand doesn't just slow, it fundamentally weakens. All of this leads to a critical question that Edmunds' data forces the industry to confront. If buyers are tired, cautious, and increasingly unwilling to engage, what happens when the next economic shock arrives? Because according to these numbers, the market is not building strength, it's balancing on thin ice, and the smallest crack could send consequences far beyond the showroom floor. Edmunds' data suggests that the industry may already be absorbing those cracks, even if they aren't being acknowledged publicly. Early warning signs are appearing in financing approval rates, which are quietly tightening across multiple credit tiers. Buyers who would have been approved just a year ago are now being declined or pushed into higher rates, and that friction is reducing demand before it ever reaches the dealership. This invisible barrier is one of the most dangerous pressures because it doesn't show up in pricing headlines. The data also points to a rising dependence on longer loan terms as a survival tactic. Edmunds shows 6, 7, and even 8-year loans becoming more common, not because buyers want them, but because they are the only way to make payments appear manageable. This pushes risk further into the future and increases default exposure. It's a temporary solution that builds long-term instability into the system. Another revealing detail is how quickly online engagement drops once buyers reach payment calculators. Edmunds tracks this behavior closely, and the pattern is clear. Interest spikes at the vehicle level, then collapses at the affordability stage. This means demand exists in theory, but not in execution. Buyers like the cars, they just can't justify the cost. Edmunds also shows a growing disconnect between MSRP and real-world transaction prices. While sticker prices remain elevated, actual deals require increasingly complex incentive stacking. This confuses buyers and fuels skepticism. When pricing lacks transparency, trust erodes, and Edmunds' data shows that erosion accelerating. What's more, fleet sales and rental channels are no longer absorbing excess inventory the way they once did. Edmunds' numbers indicate these channels are becoming more selective, unwilling to overpay or take on risk. Without Without that pressure valve, unsold vehicles stay on dealer lots longer, compounding financial strain. The data further reveals that even service departments, traditionally stable profit centers, are facing headwinds. As consumers delay new purchases, they also delay non-essential maintenance. This double hit weakens dealership economics from both sides, leaving less room to maneuver when sales slow. Edmunds also highlights how media narratives are lagging behind reality. Headlines still talk about resilience and normalization, but the data shows fragility. This mismatch creates a dangerous delay in response, as decision makers wait for confirmation that never comes. Taken together, Edmunds' latest findings paint a market that is not collapsing overnight, but slowly tightening around itself. Every lever the industry pulls seems to relieve one pressure while increasing another. And according to the data, the next phase won't be driven by flashy announcements or bold innovations, but by a quiet, unavoidable reckoning that is already beginning to take shape. That reckoning, according to Edmunds' data, will be felt first in pricing discipline. Automakers are being forced to choose between protecting brand image and moving metal, and the numbers suggest that image is starting to lose. Subtle price adjustments, hidden incentives, and quiet dealer support are increasing, even as official messaging remains upbeat. This gap between public statements and real-world actions is widening fast. Edmunds also shows that consumer patience is becoming a strategic weapon. Buyers are learning that waiting works. Listings sit longer, dealers follow up more aggressively, and terms slowly improve for those who don't rush. This behavioral shift flips the power dynamic, and the industry is struggling to adapt to buyers who are no longer emotionally driven. Another striking insight is how quickly sentiment changes when a single automaker blinks. Edmunds tracks cross-shopping behavior, and when one brand cuts prices, interest spikes across competitors. This creates a domino effect that can unravel pricing structures industry-wide. No manufacturer wants to move first, but Edmunds' data suggests someone always does. The data also highlights an uncomfortable truth about innovation cycles. Many recent upgrades are perceived as incremental rather than transformative. Edmunds shows buyers questioning whether newer models justify higher prices when older versions perform adequately. This perception weakens the traditional upgrade cycle and reduces urgency. Edmunds further reveals that resale value expectations are being rewritten. Buyers no longer assume strong depreciation protection, especially with rapid price changes and evolving technology. This uncertainty makes long-term ownership riskier in the buyer's mind, and risk-averse behavior follows. What's particularly telling is how internal forecasts are being revised. Edmunds' insight suggests that optimistic projections are being quietly walked back, replaced with conservative scenarios focused on stability rather than expansion. This mindset shift at the planning level often precedes visible market changes. The data also indicates that marketing strategies are losing effectiveness. Messages built around performance, prestige, and lifestyle are resonating less than straightforward affordability and reliability. Edmunds shows higher engagement when messaging addresses real financial concerns rather than aspiration. All of these trends converge on a single reality. The industry is entering a phase where trust, transparency, and value matter more than hype. Edmunds' data doesn't predict chaos, but it does expose vulnerability. And as these vulnerabilities stack up, the data hints that one final pressure may soon force the industry to confront what it has been avoiding all along. That final pressure is simple, unavoidable consumer math, and Edmunds' data shows it overpowering every other factor. Buyers are no longer persuaded by branding, promises, or projections. They are looking at total cost, long-term risk, and personal stability, and if the numbers do not work, the deal is dead. This is the moment the industry can no longer talk its way out of the problem. Edmunds makes it clear that the next chapter of the car market will not be defined by who builds the flashiest vehicles, but by who restores affordability and confidence. Automakers that ignore this signal risk watching demand erode year after year. Dealers that adapt, simplify pricing, and meet buyers where they are may survive, while others will struggle under rising costs and shrinking margins. What shocked the industry most about this data is not that conditions are tightening, but how widespread and synchronized the shift has become. This is not isolated to one brand, one segment, or one region. Edmunds' numbers show a national reset in how people think about buying cars, and resets like this do not reverse quickly. The message is now unavoidable. The old model of ever higher prices, longer loans, and blind optimism is breaking down. Edmunds' new data didn't just reveal a slowdown, it exposed a turning point, and the automakers who understand that difference will shape the future of the industry, while those who ignore it may soon find themselves reacting instead of leading.